Hello, you're listening to the Spiritual Abuse Podcast, and my name is Eddie.
This is Joseph. Today we're having one of my friends and his wife, Christian and Stephanie Johnson, join us, and they have a very interesting story. Grew up in the church. Christian specifically, he's been involved with, what did you say, Christian, like 10 churches over the past 7 to 8 years or so?
It's probably been right about that, yeah, if not more, truth be told.
Yeah,
so.
He has a career as a worship pastor. So just like Eddie, he has experience with being deep into the culture of many different churches. So I'm excited to dive into his story. I've heard a little bit of what he's been through, and I think it's going to be healing and therapeutic for those of us who have been in any sort of leadership capacity where we've experienced some sort of spiritual abuse, or maybe if you've been in a staff context and you think you're experiencing spiritual abuse. But yeah, with all that to say, I want to welcome Christian and Stephanie. So welcome to the podcast, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Thank you for what you guys are doing. It's certainly is therapeutic, as you said, and so we're excited to be a part of it and give our story, and hoping that it will do the same for other people. So
yeah, so yeah, what's your story? Like, where do you want to start on your story? Because it sounds like there's a lot packed up in there.
yeah, there really is. We both, and I'll kind of give these kind of parallel. We both grew up in the church. Stephanie, I'll give your story a little bit first, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Stephanie grew up in a Christian home, essentially. I say essentially because her grandmother raised her for most of her life. When she was about 4, her mother essentially dropped her off on the front porch of her grandma's house, and said, "I can't take care of these kids." It was her at 4 years old, her younger sister at 2, and her brother at months old. Dropped all 3 of them off at the front porch of her grandma's house, essentially, and so it was a very interesting situation in the fact that my story was totally different from that, and we kind of met in a weird part of both of our lives. I grew up in a Christian home. Both parents were married for my entire life, still are married to this day, and still have a great relationship. I grew up in a wonderful home. Most of what I dealt with was outside sources. Most of the not only spiritual abuse, but psychological abuse that I dealt with, which was a lot of what was early on, and I'll get into that later, was dealt with outside of it. I say almost all of it, other than, parents, parents being parents when you're young, and you have those moments of hearing them argue in the other room or whatever. But I mean, even then it was always, I was always taught, we deal with these issues. You don't go to bed angry at each other. And so that was the kind of house that I grew up in. My dad was always respectful of my mom. I grew up in a very good Christian home. And so, when I was, 12 or 13, picked up a guitar for the first time. Never thought it would ever be something that, would turn into a career or turn into something that I would be passionate about. Just liked music. And so I ended up picking up a guitar. And when I was 14 or 15, started volunteering at church. I knew I could sing. And so I just put that to work and in the way that I thought I could. And I ended up volunteering at our church, and that kind of is where the passion kind of took off. I ended up going to church camp that summer, and committing my life to ministry, and just really feeling like that's where God was calling me. And again, a very good, Christian camp.
Yeah. So you said you felt that call to ministry at that Christian camp. Can you describe that experience maybe briefly of how you knew I want to go into ministry, but specifically this form of ministry?
Yeah. So, I knew I was passionate about that. And I just remember, what happened was we were, it wasn't even so much at Christian camp that I felt the calling. That was when I took the calling. But I was, I don't know if you've ever heard of Ricardo Sanchez, but he's won several Dove Awards, Power of the Cross. If you get a chance, highly recommend looking him up. He's a fantastic musician. Not only that, but fantastic worship pastor. Every time you can just feel Jesus come off of him every time you hear him, every time you have him in the room. And, I mean, he can be 300 yards away from you, but you can feel it. I mean, it's just this, I don't know how else to explain it, but the spiritual musk that comes off of him when he walks in the room. And you can just feel the passion from his heart. But anyway, we went to a small event. Like I said, he's a Dove Award-winning artist, very well known, and he was actually at a small church here in Tulsa, or here really in the Broken Arrow area. And I had gotten the opportunity. He was the pastor of the church was a friend of my mom's, and he had invited us. So we go to this event with him. He's got his full band, and there's maybe 40 to 50 people in the crowd. I mean, it was like super intimate, worshipful moment, and we just got to hear him essentially just worship, over us. That really is what it was, and it was just so powerful. It just hit me. That was when it really hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, it was just, it felt like God pounding me in the face at that point. I mean, it was that moment of realization of this is what I need to be doing. And just the passion. I mean, I remember wanting to just run around the room because it was just, I could feel it coming off of me, yeah, it was just a really powerful moment of understanding. And again, I was still so young at that time, was still really young and wasn't sure what that meant. And so when I got to go, when I was at church camp within the next couple of years, I can't remember when it was, but it was, I want to say within the next couple of years, they were talking about accepting the calling, that Christ has on your life. And I was like, okay, well, what does that look like? And of course it was nice because it was like all these questions that I was asking myself were being answered in the process. And so it just, there's those God moments where it's like everything you get ready to say before you even think it, all of a sudden it's being answered kind of thing. And that's the way it was. It was like every time I even got ready to think, okay, well, what's my next question? It was already being answered. And so I just kind of felt like this is my opportunity to say, this is what I'm going to do. And, it's kind of, almost a baptism kind of thing. You're declaring in front of your church family, this is what you want to do. And so at least that's what it was for me. And so I walked up, had an opportunity to sit down with one of the volunteers there and just talk about that. Of course, it was kind of funny because his story was almost kind of the same. He was in worship ministry. That was where he was called to. And so I got to sit down with him, was just paired with him unintentionally. I mean, there were 150, or so volunteers, not including the 300 people that are, down on the floor accepting their calling. And I sit down with this guy, and he's telling me, this is the same thing that happened to me. And so it was just really neat. It was a really cool moment. It was like all these pieces are meshing together, and you can't help but sit there and go, this has got to be God. It was just a really cool opportunity. And so, yeah, I just remember that being a very defining part of what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a really, really neat experience, at least for me, whenever I was accepting that. And I just, I get excited when I talk about it because I mean that's my passion. That's what I want to do with my life.
Such a pivotal moment in your life. So it sounds like you really encountered God in this intimate worship experience, and you're like, I encountered God in such a powerful way. I want to help other people encounter God in this same way or a similar way, primarily through music. And that's so cool that you got to be just talk to another worship pastor and just have that clarity for you of like, this is what I want to do. So from there,
to me it just sounds like I hear the word like pure and authentic. It just seems like a real thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking. What I was getting ready to say too is like there wasn't anything like amazing about it. There wasn't this like 1 second or moment where it was like, this is what it's supposed to be, other than when we were in the midst of that worship experience with Ricardo. But it wasn't like any specific moment where it was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what I'm called to. It was like you said, pure, authentic, just very simplistic, I think is even a good word for it, moment with God.
Christian, one of the things, we've gotten some feedback from our first podcast, and I just want our listeners to know that we just have to make this really, really clear that we're definitely, we're pointing people towards Jesus. We're pointing people towards the church, and there's some people that think that we might be possibly coming in at it from an angle to
undermine it,
call out the church. Yeah, and that's just not the case because
right.
These are real, authentic people with real, authentic stories, and our mission is for Kristen and Stephanie to be able to share their story of, where it went off the rails and what happened. And that's what we're doing. So if anyone's listening, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I felt like that was a good poignant point to bring that up right
Yeah,
there.
I'm
So
glad
go
you,
ahead,
I'm glad you
Joseph.
said that. So Christian, so you felt a call to ministry, and you said you were how old at this time?
This would have probably been 12 to 13, maybe 14.
Wow. So it's like you had that defining moment of having a pretty good idea of what you want to do with your life at a pretty young age. That's pretty
Right.
empowering. That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
empowering.
I mean, and I, I think there's, I'm not trying to get biblical here or anything, but I do. I mean, the way I've grown up is there's an age of accountability. There's this point in your life where you realize I have to have a relationship with Jesus, or I'm going to end up in hell. And even though that's the sad and unfortunate truth, that's kind of how I've always been raised, and so it all kind of happened really quickly, especially, and I'm sure that both of you can relate to this in the fact of when you're growing up in the church, you kind of have that earlier than a lot of, you know, a lot of other people who don't grow up in the church have that. Of you just have this realization of like, I need to get my life together. And of course nobody's perfect. Nobody's, we're all messed up and gross and so the idea that, it's this, again, this spiritual amazing moment with God is an overstatement. I think. I don't think there's any moment where you sit there and you're like, I mean, I've had those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I can feel God in the midst of this situation, but I don't feel like that's how he works. And I think the Bible explains that very vividly. The little moments and the little things are where God shows up biggest. And I think that was always, that's always been the way that I was raised, is that's how it happens. So, yeah, I mean, it was a pivotal point in my life, but, was it an awe-inspiring story? Probably not,
Yeah.
So
it was a deeply personal and spiritual experience for you that maybe people around you may have not shared the same traumatic experience, but God met you in such a personal, real way. And no one can tell you it was manipulated or orchestrated or fabricated, because it was just such an encounter. It's hard to explain and put into words. I love that. So from this point, 12 or 13, you know what you want to do with your life. You have an idea of what outlet you want to do ministry. Did you start getting involved right away with that church? Were you volunteering, or did you get involved with the youth group? Like, what does it look like? And what was this church like specifically?
Yeah. So at this point in time, we were going to a pretty large church here in the Tulsa Broken Arrow area. And so I had plenty of people around me that were encouraging me in that, and I was actually, we had friends. My parents are originally from Oklahoma as well, and they're from a small town outside of Stillwater. So if you know Oklahoma State University, about 30 minutes outside of Stillwater or so. Yeah, so we had friends, or my parents had friends, that they were they had connections with this large Baptist church camp. And so I had already been kind of going with them for the first couple of years when they had a band that was actually coming with us to lead our in-cabin worship time. And so it was actually neat because they were like a recording artist at that point in time, or up and coming. And if I said their name, you would, well, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. They've always been great friends of mine. But they, at the time, were called Consumed by Fire. They're actually moving over into secular music now. But they are like really, at least decent friends of mine at the time. And so it was really neat because I'm like, awestruck, even though they're not that big. But I'm like awestruck over these guys. And like, I'm just a young teenager, like, wanting to go into music and seeing what they're doing, and just just awestruck. And so I actually had some really good conversations with them. With the way the bunks were set up in our cabin at the church camp, I was actually sharing a bed with one of them. They had taken two twin beds and pushed them together. So we had this small queen bed, which that's another story for another time. There's a funny joke that I ended up waking up one night with literally one of them and he will deny it to this day. So Caleb, if you're hearing this, this did happen. You're a liar if you say otherwise. But I woke up, I woke up one night and he was cuddling me like a teddy bear. And I said, Caleb, and of course I'm like hanging about at least 6 or 7 inches off the bed. So if he lets go, I'm falling 6 feet to the floor because this was a bunk bed style bed. And I said, Caleb, and he goes, yeah. I said, why are you holding me? And all of a sudden he real slowly pulls his hand off. And I mean, I had to like grab onto the side of the bed just to stop from falling. And he will deny it to this day that any of that ever happened. But I promise you, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and remember the whole thing. And even his brother will tell you he saw the whole thing happen. So it was just one of those things. But anyway, a long rabbit trail to say that we just had a really neat connection in the process. And after they ended up leaving a few years later, because they didn't come back, they were there with us for a couple of years, and then of course the next year they didn't come back. But this I ended up taking over leading the in-cabin worship. And keep in mind, I didn't say this, but the church that I was going with, they were very small. So we were going to church at a essentially mega church, and then I was leading with this smaller church that my family knew, the pastors. And I mean, at the most one year, I think we had 15 kids. So it was a very small group, but it was really neat because there was a lot of opportunity for intimacy, and the pastors were so encouraging. And so and I think some of it had to do with how far out in the country they lived and where the church was located, but there was so much intimacy. I still have a wonderful relationship with them. We'll go, we go and visit them every once in a while, and they are mom and dad. And they've always been that, because they're just, we go over there and she's like, all right, what do you want me to cook? That's what she does. She has, oh my gosh, the woman, not to go on another rabbit trail, but she makes the most amazing sopapilla cheesecake you will ever eat in your entire life. So anyway.
By the way, shout out to Dylan. You may be hearing her in the background. Christian and Stephanie just had a 1-month-old, and it's just so awesome. Congratulations, guys. Okay, so that's very.
We've all got. You both have babies that are sleeping right now. I've got dogs that are barking and run all over the house, and that's the world we live in right now. So
sure is.
We're cool. We're not looking for studio perfection here. We're just looking for just honest, real conversations.
Sure, yeah. So Christian, that's a really interesting and neat experience to be serving in a relatively smaller, more intimate setting in that church, contrasted with a mega church. How would you contrast the two cultures and environment? Would you say one is more healthy than the other? I just would like to kind of go on that slight tangent.
Yeah, no, I'm actually glad you said that, because I would agree with that statement. Well, you didn't really go into specifics there, but I do think that a lot of times, and I think Stephanie and I would both agree, a lot of times we find that those smaller churches where you are able to have that intimate relationship with the pastor, where they're from a smaller town, you are able to have, you're able to see their heart a lot easier. And I think that's the neat part. And I think, I'm trying to find a good way to say this, you can see their heart in a way that is pure because it is, if that makes sense. The small town, there's not an expectation for money. Their church has been fully paid for. They've had this building for years. All they're paying every month, and all that their tithe is going to is the bills. And so you see that. And unfortunately, the reason that you see it is because of the contrasting, mega church to small town church. You can see there's not a need for money. There's not an expectation for money. If they have to, and I remember even talking to them, there were times when the money was coming straight out of their work paycheck, and they were paying the bills for this place because it was so important to them that this church kept running, because the town needed it. And the town that they were in.
So did these small town pastors, did they have other jobs outside of being pastors?
Yeah, they had to. Because the pastor, at least with a couple of churches, because we worked with I've worked with mega churches, I've worked with medium-sized churches, or whatever you would call it, all the way down to small town churches. And so Yeah, I mean, usually that was the case, especially with the small town churches. They all had some sort of secondary job that they were working. Either one of them that we worked with, he was um, waking up early in the morning to teach kids from across the world English. And so he would get on. We were actually staying with him at one point because we were getting ready to go to camp with them, and so we were staying with them for a couple of days prior to, because it was just easier for us to do it that way. And we would we would wake up at what, 4 or 5 in the morning.
It was like 3 or 4.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 in the morning, and you could hear him in the other room going, "Very good," talking to these kids, essentially from this closet office that he had. It was just, yeah, so it was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, that was the case a lot of times where they were working some sort of secondary job where they were providing for their family in some sort of other way, um, and usually never taking a paycheck for the volunteer work that they were doing with the church.
Yeah. So
One
so
of
you got to see more of a pure expression of church management, more of an overflow of passion for the Lord, not so much as benefiting financially from the church. Not which this podcast is not, you know, advocating for pastors not getting a paycheck or anything like that. I'm just drawing a contrast here of like the heart of somebody who is not taking a paycheck from a church versus a mega church, you know, where they're getting significant salaries at times. But yeah, keep going.
and it was only because they had to, and that was, I think, the beauty of it. It was unfortunately, and I think that's where the devil comes into play. Truth be told, I think he uses those opportunities because those smaller churches aren't making as much of an impact on a large community, that there's not a need to attack them like there is a large church who is. And so I mean, truth be told, just from what I've seen, I think that is one of the devil's tactics. I think that is something that he uses to connive. And so you have these issues like what you dealt with, where you have maybe somebody who was pure hearted early on, and this is what they turn into because of the situation that they're in. The opportunity that they've been given, whether it's by God or not, is tainted by the devil.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, because when you start off with a church that has no money, and then let's just face it, in mega churches I'm not sure if I'm mandated by a non-disclosure agreement or not, so I'm not going to say anything. But I'll just say that there are large amounts of money that come in. I mean, just large amounts, and it then kind you can say all the right things, but it's just got more of a business slash vision feel to it than it does than a people feel.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No,
Didn't mean to
that's a
interrupt.
great point too, and that's something I didn't even think about. Is when you go to those smaller churches, there isn't a vision because their vision is set on the people and what they're doing, and it's set on God. And I'm getting chills thinking about that because I didn't think about that. I never thought about that. That's a beautiful way to think about it. But you're right. Unfortunately, there's this expectation to have a vision because you're reaching this larger community, and they want to know what you're about. When you're in this smaller community and these people have been coming for years, there's no expectation for that anymore. There's not an expectation to, this is what we're about. They're coming to church because they get to see their friends. They're coming to church because they know Tom, Dick, and Harry, every morning, and they're coming in to see all their friends, to sing a couple of songs and enjoy lunch together. I mean, that's what they did every single Sunday. They had lunch ready after service every Sunday. And at least for this one church.
And truth be told, like when you look in the New Testament, when I read it, again, we're not making a statement on yay or nay. This is my personal opinion. When I look at the New Testament personally, I do not see a whole lot of grounds or examples of mega churches in the New Testament. I see people meeting in the homes, and those homes multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And I see people like Paul and Peter and all of them setting up these house churches to impact community through that, not necessarily creating this big centralized mega church. And I feel like seeing a mega church in the New Testament is anachronism and porting our American idea of church into the New Testament instead of reading the New Testament for what it is. But anyways, that's just my personal.
Well, I mean, except for that one time when Jesus fed 5,000 people, but whatever.
Yeah.
But
That's true.
But I mean, yeah, no, I agree. And to make a very long story short, it was just, it's always been pure when we go and visit them. They are no longer the pastors of that church, and it's only because they were moving, I want to say for work at the time. I can't remember the specific situation. Yeah, it was for work actually. It was for work, and they ended up moving, and they're no longer the pastors of that church, but we still have a wonderful relationship with them. I get calls from them, and I mean, it's just like you never skip a beat. It's like you're talking to them like you just spoke yesterday, and it's so neat. There were times I was like, man, I wish I could just leave the church I'm at and just come here. Unfortunately, I didn't have a job if I left, I didn't have a job to support my family. So it was like these moments where it was like, if there was a way to do it, I would be here. I would so much rather be here. Forget the opportunity for networking. This is where I want to be. And so, yeah, it was just really neat. And even then, just the opportunity to be able to be with them. And again, it was just the amount of peace that you felt when you were with them was amazing.
Yeah. So this is a unique experience because this is the Spiritual Abuse Podcast. But this is a really good opportunity to talk about spiritual health, it sounds. So before we get into times where you have experienced spiritual abuse and you've recovered from that, what about this particular church experience could you describe as like characteristics that made it spiritually healthy? Because people listening to this, we're going to have many different people, either people who aren't identified as Christian, but a lot of people who have been spiritually abused, maybe jaded, maybe needing some hope that there are some good churches out there. So like, what could you say is an example of like, hey, this is spiritual health and I saw it in this small town church?
Right. I think I heard somebody say at one time, and I'm so sorry, you're hearing our dogs now barking in the background. But I think I had a friend tell me one time, and it was really kind of a friend that he was kind of in the same position, was working for a pretty large church as a youth minister at a church in Florida, and we had met on a retreat actually. But anyway, one of the things that he says is because I asked him, I said, what do you look for when you're looking for a church? I said, because the thing that I struggle with is when I'm given an opportunity to try and find a job with a church, I'm like, okay, I don't care what's going on. I have to make a paycheck somehow. And if I can make it doing what I love, I don't care what church, or, I don't care if it's four walls, and three people standing in there. If if I can provide for my family and know that God's got it taken care of, that's what I want to do. And I said, so what do you look for when you're looking for a church? And the first thing he said was, you look for some place that is spiritually healthy. And he didn't really give me an answer to that. I kept as far as what that meant. He just kind of left me with it. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? Because I had been in these positions for so long at this point in time. So this was later on. I had been in this position so long where I was not in a healthy church lifestyle. And I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, healthy? I mean, I had never even heard somebody use the word healthy in correspondence with the church. I didn't even know what that meant, which looking back to me was like, that's just crazy, because that's the main word you hear, And so I remember going back home, because we were in Florida at the time. I remember going back home, and 90% of the plane ride was just spent going, what does that mean? And I remember talking with Stephanie, and I said, we need to be looking for a healthy church. We need to be looking for a place that is going to help us grow. And I remember thinking back to those pure moments with the pastor from the small town church that we were with. And I remember thinking about, and in fact, I say I remember thinking, it was more a few months later, we were at camp with them. And I had the opportunity to just sit down and talk. And he's asking me questions, kind of like we are now, where we're just sitting in the, kind of in the round almost. And he's just asking me questions about me. and just wants to know not about my my musicianship or my ministry, but wants to know about me and who I am as a person. And it broke me down emotionally. And I remember we had this moment where we were sitting. They were doing what they called, what was it? They called it the hot seat. And it was this opportunity to just essentially have a student sit in this chair in the middle of the room in front of all of their peers, and I and the rest of the group of musicians that I had with me were playing very quietly, and essentially they put this student in the middle of the room, and it wasn't forced. It was, if you want to do this, and a lot of times it was led with a leader giving their story. But these kids loved it; they ate it up. And it was just this opportunity to sit in the middle of the room and say, "This is how God's worked on me this week, and this is what I'm going to take home from camp." We would do it at the end of the week, and you'd say, "This is what I've learned," and it was the way these students responded to each other. They would, after the person was done, it was this moment of clapping, and it wasn't even 2 seconds after they were done clapping that they were around this student, all just hugging them. I mean, like, it was the coolest thing. And then they immediately right after would start praying for them. I mean, every student doing their own prayer, just pray, and it was just this pure, healthy. I mean, these students knew what healthy church looked like, and these kids are, some of them barely teenagers, and they are. I mean, they're their brother's keeper. They're showing what this healthy. I don't even know how to say it. There's no words to express what happened.
See, that almost makes me cry because I I've experienced youth group stuff like that before, and it was just where you're real and honest and vulnerable, and you might not have the emotional maturity that we do now as adults, but it's so real and healthy. And then I remember the older I got and the deeper I got in church stuff, the less I felt the ability to do that because I didn't want to let people down. I didn't want to take my mask off. I didn't want to be real. I didn't want to be vulnerable because I didn't want to get corrected for not towing the line. And sometimes we go through stuff and I just didn't feel that anymore.
And I think that, and I'll get into this in a bit, but I think that was the difference between the church that we were attending and this church that we were supporting at church camp, or the church that I was leading at, that I was being paid by, and the church that I was leading at. I think that was the major difference, and I would totally agree with that. And like I said, I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it was just beautiful. The moment that, I remember sitting there and I'm like, there's just this moment of pure. I don't even know how else to explain it, but just pure joy, where you're just like, I wish that I had these moments when I was a student. I wish I had this opportunity to be able to express myself around my friends like this, because I didn't, because I grew up in a large church. The truth be told, an unhealthy church, and there was some spiritual abuse that happened there. Which, again, we'll get back to that. So yeah, I mean, it was just really neat, and so to answer your again, to make a very a very long rabbit trail out of that, to answer your question, Joseph, I think that those were the moments that reminded me of what that really looked like. Those healthy moments where you can just almost visibly see Jesus standing in the room, and just the amount of love. There was just these moments. I remember seeing these students hug each other, and we actually, it was really, I'm gonna explain. It was so neat. I didn't even think I wasn't even gonna talk about this, but it was really kind of neat. I remember we had set up these little tea lights, the little like candle lights that they flicker, because we didn't want to light like real candles in this cabin. It was it was very old style cabin, and any amount of fire inside the place would have probably lit the whole place up. But anyway, so we had these little like tea lights that we were using, and I remember the students, when they would come, because we had put them around the chair that was in the middle, and when they would come into the circle, they would just start kicking them like crazy. The funny part is when the really crazy part to me was when they, at one point, they had gone around it was like the first or second student that had gone into the circle. They had all stepped away, And when they stepped away, the student was still sitting in the circle, and the tea lights had made a heart, had formed a heart. I mean, I'm not even kidding, like a perfect heart shape around the student. It was just the little thing. It was just the craziest thing I'd ever seen. And I remember looking down and being like, if that's not God, I don't know what is. I mean, and even if it wasn't, it was just the purity of the moment. Like you're just seeing the heart of Jesus, and literally it's forming on the floor in front of you. It was just so neat to see just this pure, I don't even know how else to explain it. I'm just getting fired up thinking about it. It was just so amazingly pure, and such a healthy moment with these kids who were really seeing Jesus show up in their own lives.
So before I interject something into to our listeners, I want to just make sure that I heard this right. So you felt a call to ministry at a camp that was run by this small town church, and some of your fondest, healthiest moments in church is in this same small church setting, right?
So that's kind of the really neat part. This I felt the calling, not with this specific church, so this church camp, to give you an idea, and I didn't explain this. This church camp was, you have all of the different churches that come from all over the state. If I said the name of the church camp, I'm sure somebody who's listening would know. It was a very large church camp here in Oklahoma. And what would happen was churches from all over the state and now all over the country come, and they group together, but you're in a cabin with your church. So your church they're with an organization that it's an 8-week camp, and so you only are there for 1 week, but you're there for 1 week with the church that you're with, and then another church comes in the next week, and so on and so forth for 8 weeks during the summer. And so I was with one specific church leading their in-cabin time when this moment was happening. But the way that it worked is then at night we had these moments before, of course, our nightly meetings together as just a church. We would all group together in a giant tabernacle build. They called it tabernacle building. Together, the 5,000 people that were there. And that was where my calling happened. So to re-explain that a little better, was within that large group meeting. And then, of course, when you come back to your church that night, they give a praise report, and you're like, hey, this person gave their life to ministry or whatever. So you have that moment where you're able to express that to your peers, and like, I gave my life to ministry or whatever.
But it was a smaller moment within that conference with the smaller church.
Exactly. Wow. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to interject in our listeners, just a question, food for thought, not saying one way or the other. There's so much power in small settings. There's so much power in the one-on-one. There's so much power in the small church. Maybe our idea of kingdom impact has been tainted by the corporate America Western idea of American capitalism as something that we can measure and quantify with metrics and data, whereas maybe spiritual success is in the power of the smallness of the mustard seed, that we don't see the full impact until the next life. Because as you can see in Christian and Stephanie's life, in Christian's life specifically, the thing that is helping him have a picture of spiritual health is what he experienced in a small setting, not the big setting, but the small setting. And I think it's just important for us to think about the power of small and not necessarily over glorify the big in image. So just food for thought, not saying one way or the other, but Christian. So that was a really awesome, healing, amazing discussion. But like we said, this is the Spiritual Abuse Podcast, and there is power in healing and exposing things that we're doing. Oh, another thing I just want to say too for our listeners out there. This is what the Spiritual Abuse Podcast is all about. Like Eddie was saying before, we're not trying to tarnish Christianity or tear down organized religion. We want churches to be like that. We see the church being able to perform like that. We see the ability for churches to be healthy again. But we believe the only way churches can be healthy again is if we expose where they're missing it, to expose the spiritual malpractice and expose where the kingdom of darkness has infiltrated some of these areas. So when we put light on that, we can actually bring ourselves back to a healthy environment. So Christian, in your story, when did you start reflecting back? When did you start noticing spiritual abuse? Where were you at? What church? Were you on staff, volunteer? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of glad we went on that little bit of a tangent, or that very long tangent, because it really kind of helps the story. But I was I was actually in the midst of I was helping these smaller churches, and leading with them, at the same time that I was working with this mega church that I was at. And when I say mega church, this church was probably about, oh goodness, 1,500 people on a regular Sunday. I was leading at our smaller campus, which our smaller campus probably ran about 75 to 100 people on a regular Sunday. So, and that was where I was posted. That was my post. I would set up 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. I say I would set up. Me and Stephanie and I would set up on Sunday morning from 7 o'clock until 10. From 7 o'clock until 9. We had to set up the entire stage. That included the drums, speakers, and when I say drums, that was an entire drum setup with a cage. If you've ever lifted a drum cage on a Sunday morning, you know what I mean when I say those things are heavy. They weigh at least they've got to weigh at least 100 pounds. They're so stinking heavy, 75 to 100 pounds. And so we were doing this every Sunday, put up and break down. And so after church was over, after I was done leading, I was back in breaking down all of this. And if I had help on a Sunday, that was sporadic. I may have help one day, I may not. But anyway,
how old
so that
were
was
you? How old were you?
this has only been a couple of years. This has probably been two or 3 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah, in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, in the last 2 or 3 years or so, is when I started doing that. And at that point in time, Stephanie wasn't helping. I was by myself doing it.
And were you on staff? Were you just volunteering? What were you
I was
doing?
on staff. I was on staff, but I was part-time, working 20 to 30 hours a week.
Air quotes of part-time.
Yeah, air quotes around part-time. I was part-time, working 20 to 30 hours a week, which is just short of full-time. Also working a part-time job. So I was essentially working, and I think I was doing some schooling at that time too. So altogether, I was probably working, air quotes again, 60 to 70 hours a week, including my time at the church. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I remember you saying that from your story. Yeah. And so, and then trying to have a social life at the same time. And so most of my social life was happening anytime between 9 and midnight, on a weekday, because my weekends were taken up with church. And so, it was, and I was not being paid for any of it. I was on, again, air quotes, salary. But even then I was only considered what did they call it? It was a contract employee, because that was the tax term for it. I was a contracted employee. Just to be very blatantly honest, I was making $200 a week. Or no, was it $200 a week to work 30 hours in the church?
And you didn't have any benefits or anything, right?
Oh no, God no! I was contracted. Yeah, no, they contract employees based on tax forms state that you don't have to give them any benefits. And so the whole idea, and I had spoken with the worship pastor at that point in time, was that sooner or later I would be full time. When they needed it, I would be full time at some point in the near future, hopefully. And again,
Well,
it was all
that's
just
a characteristic. So that's a characteristic of not just churches but business, where they have contractors, and your contractors aren't there for the job they have now. They're there for the job that they will eventually have to be full time with benefits and all that stuff. But a lot of times contractors are doing just as much work as like a regular paid employee, but like you said, there's a tax. They're getting paid for a fraction of it, and it just as a side note, it just makes my heart heavy that we've taken that concept that I just don't agree with in a business setting, and we've brought that into the church even more. Like that just boggles my mind, because all that does, if you're going to be completely honest, is allows you to get the same level of labor in most cases for a fraction of the cost, like you said, Christian. And it's just not right in my opinion. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and and you're right. It was just one of those things. It broke me down after a while, for sure. But anyway, I was volunteering with these small churches because that was where I was getting most of my spiritual life. was working with these churches over the summer. And I mean, I told them, I'd tell them all the time, I'm going to be gone the Sunday that I have to go to church camp because this is important to me. And so that when I was working at the church, I told them for they knew when it comes first week of the summer, because that was when I went, Christian's not going to be there that Sunday because I was with them leading all week. And 90% of the time after that week, my voice was gone anyway. So if I could lead was all circumstantial based on whether or not I came back with a voice. And 90% of the time I never did. Because so it was just one of those things. It was like they knew when it came summertime that I was not going to be there for the first couple of weeks, so I was working with those churches, and I at one point during the summer I was probably at this church camp for 3 or 4 weeks of the summer, and again, half the time it was no pay. Some of these churches would pay me to be there, which was great because it was like I was getting paid more to be there with them to do more work. But really, to me, it wasn't work. I'm there hanging out with the kids, having fun. Being a child again, being a kid, and getting to lead worship. I mean, it was just that was a dream. So it was. I was getting paid more to be there with them, which was the beauty of it. And even if I wasn't getting paid, it was still just, again, like we were saying, a beautiful, pure moment. So. Like I said, at the most, I was working 3 or 4 weeks out of the summer doing that, and then sometimes coming back home if they needed me at the church, working again on the Sunday. So I may have no voice and be trying to lead worship. So there was just a lot of times where I would come home, and about a year into me being there is when Stephanie and I started dating. So this would have been, what, 2017? Mid 2017?
Yeah.
Yeah, mid 2017.
Fall of 2017.
Yeah, about fall 2017. And so I just remember, because this was about the time that I was coming out of summer, and I just remember being exhausted, just tired. And the wonderful part about it was my direct report that I had at the mega church that I was at was so supportive. He was fantastic. My direct report was amazing. I could have never asked for a better campus pastor. My direct report was our campus pastor. He was just absolutely amazing, always very supportive. He had that small town church pastor. He was just always in that headspace of a small town church pastor, for lack of better terms. So it was always awesome because he would always do everything he could to make sure if I needed a week off, he had somebody in there. And even if he couldn't, he was always like super apologetic. He was like, "I'm so sorry. I can't find anybody. I'm going to have you there." Was just super, but he would do everything he could to be supportive that week. He was jumping in, helping where he could, made sure I had to do the least amount of work if I needed that. And so it was nice to have him because he was always very supportive. And even he was actually very supportive within me and Stephanie's relationship. And so we just had a very, very healthy relationship with him while we were there. And so it was really nice to have that. And so I keep getting off track here, but was working with these churches, was working with this mega church. And about a year into that, about the time me and Stephanie started dating, this mega church had asked me to start working with their youth. Which I was, again, super excited for because that was where really my heart was, especially with church camp. It was like, this is great. This is church camp 24/7, because I'm like, I get to do this all the time now because I'm doing music on Sundays and then music on Wednesdays. So I was in the pocket. They were paying me a little bit extra paying me $50 extra, which at that point in time was great. I was just taking, it was great. It was, and again, that they were more specific on what the expectations were for that. So I had to actually, be doing certain things in order to get that money. If I wasn't there that week, then I didn't get that money. Even if I did all the prep work, if I wasn't there that week, that was the kicker. I wasn't getting that pay if I wasn't there that week. And prep work just meaning I was making tracks, any of our backing tracks, making sure that the band was all staffed. So if I didn't have another worship leader to step in, and I wasn't there, then there was nobody leading. So luckily, again, I had some support from other worship leaders that we had there on staff. But again, same thing for them. They weren't barely getting paid for what they were doing. So they asked me to start leading that, and I was there for about a year and a half doing that. And in the process of doing that, I'm a people person. When it comes to people, put me in the middle of a crowd of people, and I'm gonna high five and shake every hand I possibly can. That I want to know every story I can possibly hear. I'm gonna try to learn every name I possibly can. I love that. I feel like that's the beauty of working in ministry, is you have this opportunity to when you step off the stage, there's this opportunity now that people know who you are to get to know them, and they're gonna walk up to you because I'd hear it all the time. I love that song you did this morning or whatever. I really appreciate that. And then of course that conversation just opens up at that point, And so there were just so many opportunities like that. And I loved that, especially with the kids. You play the songs that they like. They're like, I love that song. That song's great, or whatever. And so you just had this opportunity to be like, hey man, that's awesome. I'm glad you like the song. I'll make sure and I'd already have it planned out. I'm like, we'll play it next week for you again, or whatever. And so it was just really neat because the students always, they're more high energy, and so you just have this opportunity with them. But we got involved. I actually had a student whose mom was one of the volunteers, and I had formed a relationship with her because Stephanie was volunteering in her small group with her kids. So they would have our big group meeting, and then afterward the kids would go into their small groups, and they would do their small group meeting with their age group of kids. And they would actually go from essentially sixth grade all the way up through high school with the same group of kids, and that's what they would do with their small groups. So she had formed a relationship with Stephanie because Stephanie was one of the small group leaders. She had
come to me and asked me to be a small group.
Yeah, she had asked Stephanie to be a small group leader, and so Stephanie jumped in. Well, in the process, I ended up forming a really good relationship with her son, who was 15 at the time, almost 16. Yeah, because he was getting ready to start driving. And we just hit it off. He was one of my students in our student band, and so we just really hit it off. Had formed a really good relationship, and Stephanie had formed a really good relationship with him too. We were always making sure if we were ever, because there were times when we would even go and he would want to hang out, and I'm like, well, because of church rules and because of my own expectations for my own life, I don't really want to put myself and what the world sees, in the church going on at that point in time. There was just a lot of sexual harassment stuff going on with a lot of these larger churches at the time. I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was vulnerable for him to even attempt to say something. Not that he would, but you just have to be careful. Eddie, you probably know this a little better than even Joseph or I, but you just have to be careful when you're putting yourself in a position one-on-one with a student. Really, you can't do it at all.
Sure.
And I knew that.
We had all sorts of policies in place, and that's smart for a church to have policies in place where a man was never counseling a woman alone. That's smart. That's wisdom. And you're not alone with a child. That's smart. That's wisdom. Those are important things, especially in today's day and age.
Yeah, exactly. I think you said it better than I could have. There was just these policies that were expected from the church, but not only personally, because I knew, I need to be careful for the sake of my own personal ministry. Outside of the church, I don't want to mess up my opportunity in the future to be able to do this and do what God's called me to do. And so anyway, I would always make sure that Stephanie was with me. We were dating at that point in time. Granted, if I had the choice...
Actually, we weren't dating at that time. We were just friends.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we were just friends at that point in time and later ended up dating. Had it been a different situation, I might have wanted it a little bit different. But we trusted each other, right? We knew each other at that point well enough. We had already had plans we were already talking about dating, and I had already brought up marriage at one point in time, and Stephanie was on board. And so it was kind of one of those things that we had put a lot of trust in each other that I wasn't worried about, I wasn't worried about her as a, what's the word I'm looking for? As somebody who would, I cannot think of the word now.
The confidant?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just somebody who you could have there that would, if anything were to come out and the student said he did this to me,
that person
could. yes, that person could come back and say, no, that did not happen. And at least you're just respecting those barriers. And so we were always trying to make sure that was happening. And so anyway, we would hang out with the student, and then the student, of course, had expressed interest in one of our other students. He didn't really express interest, but you could tell there was some. He had
They
some.
flirted.
Yeah, they were flirting, and so. In order to allow them to be able to hang out together and show them what a healthy relationship looked like, because at this point, me and Stephanie were dating down the road, to show them kind of what a healthy relationship looked like. We wanted to be there with them, and so we would go and did we take them to lunch at one point?
Yeah, she was in a very bad relationship.
The girl that was
Her
yeah.
boyfriend wasn't going to church. She was really trying to get him to come to church. Her parents weren't. Met both of them, very sweet parents, but they weren't together. They weren't the type of like godly marriage influence that she needed. So we were trying to help not be the influence for her, but just help point her in the right direction. So we kind of took her on, and him as well, to just kind of like help show them like there are good influences out there. You just have to find them.
Right. And
Right.
mind you, the reason that these two students knew each other, obviously they're in the same youth group, but this was still a pretty large youth group, about 150 kids. And the reason that they knew each other was because this girl was in Stephanie's small group. So she knew her, and of course then she would hang out with Stephanie, and he would hang out with me, and then of course he had expressed, that was when they started kind of matching up, and you could tell there were, like I said, there was some flirtatiousness in there. And there wasn't like the church, I think, kind of different from the expectation of the church that you guys were at, was there wasn't an expectation. They were allowed to date, and they were it kind of felt like encouraged to not date each other, but they were encouraged to have healthy relationships, is what I'm trying to say. They really did a good job of saying, if you're going to date, not that you have to, but if you're going to date, this is what a healthy relationship looks like, at least from the podium. Now, on the backside, that was different. And that's kind of where it went south for us. So we were, of course, like I said, we're hearing what we're hearing from the podium. We need to be teaching these kids what good relationships look like. Here's what A, B, and C, this is what it looks like to have a healthy relationship and keep Jesus in the center. There was always that, make
Is
room
this
for
coming
Jesus.
from a senior pastor?
This is
or
coming from a youth pastor who is very, very much direction. The direction is coming directly from the senior pastor.
Got it. Okay.
His kids are involved in the youth group, so if he has control over the direction of where it's going to go, of course he's going to I'd be in meetings, directional meetings with the senior pastor, the youth pastor, and then the worship pastors that we're leading on Wednesday nights. And so there was a lot of pull from him, and that's where a lot of it takes off, because him and the youth pastor were very close, had been leading in this church for 20 plus years. They were friends. Yeah, they were friends before they started leading at the church. It was just they were very close. And I think, I don't know the whole story, but I'm sure one of them got hired on. Yeah, the youth pastor was this is where it gets really weird. The youth pastor at the time was the son-in-law of the lead pastor, and the lead pastor ended up they laid him off. Something had happened. He was laid off, and this new lead pastor that was brought in was the youth pastor's like best buddy. And so they were really, really close. Something like that, right? I can't remember the whole
So
situation.
he got hired back?
Everybody
got hired
knew
back
somebody.
No. He the lead pastor was never hired back. In fact, a lot of the church
lead pastor was let go.
Yeah, he was let go, and this new guy was buddy with the youth pastor. The new senior pastor was buddy with the youth pastor.
Got it.
So, and the youth pastor is still at the church, even though his father-in-law has been laid off, and he's still there currently. And him and his wife still lead the youth. You don't see his wife a whole lot, but anyway, that's another story, another rabbit trail. Anyway, all that said, he came to me one day during a meeting.
He being
the youth pastor, excuse me, had
Got
pulled
it.
me aside during a meeting, and was
And
telling
you're on
me
staff at this point, right?
exactly
As a
yes.
worship pastor?
As a worship pastor at the campus that I'm leading at, and a worship pastor with the youth.
Got it. Okay.
So, and he pulls me aside and says, "Hey, as far as the situation with the student that you've been," which again, and I didn't say this, the mother of this student who was friends with Stephanie in their small group, she had asked me to mentor her son, wanted me to be there for him. He respected me. He liked coming to me. We had kind of, I would like to say become pretty good friends, friends in quotations, and because you have to keep that distance. But anyway, so he'd come to me and he had said that the relationship that I had with that student essentially was, I don't even want to say essentially, what were his words? He was saying that me hanging out with him, with Stephanie, was inappropriate. And I was like, okay, I can understand where you're coming from. Stephanie's a girl, maybe having another guy leader there would be better. So I kind of understood that. And then his next words were, and Stephanie hanging out, because again, we had the boy student and the girl student. Stephanie hanging out with her is inappropriate as well, even if you're there. And I said, well, and I explained to him, I said, look, we're just trying to show them what a good godly relationship looks like. Stephanie is my accountability partner. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Stephanie's my accountability, so we're there trying to do that, trying to be accountable. And, so I get where you're coming from, but is that, I'm just asking the question, is that not good enough? And essentially, he didn't even say, I don't want to say essentially, he said, no, that's not good enough.
Well,
you guys.
He went to you to talk about me. He did not come to me and tell me I was an issue. I did not know until you came to me. Stephanie wasn't even in the meeting. He came to me and said, this needs to stop. You can't hang out with them one-on-one because the term he used was because it looks like a double date. And I said, okay, and again, I'm trying to be understanding, and I'm saying I can understand where you're coming from. And it made sense. I can see where that would look like that. And again, the whole, a lot of the church, the way this church was run it's not what it is, it's what it looks like. So even if it is what it is, and I'm sure you've heard that, even though it's not what it is, it's what it looks like, and you have to be careful of that. And so I understood that, and I was trying to, again, be respectful of the policy that the church was putting on me now, even if it was just directed specifically toward me. I understood, and so I was like, okay, I can get that. And so I had actually started inviting one of our other band members, who was an adult leader, to hang out with us. A male adult leader to hang out with us. And even he had expressed, that's fine. As long as you've got two male leaders and a male student, that's fine. You guys can hang out, do whatever you want. And I was like, okay, again, that makes sense. And then again, this is where it kind of, all of a sudden the story changed. I was, of course, following all these people, following the youth pastor on Instagram, following the youth group on Instagram, again, trying to do that social networking, because I was doing some of that for the youth group as well. Well, pause. We were told, Christian and I explicitly were told.
Oh, yeah.
We cannot hold hands like during prayer. We were dating. Hold hands.
Mind you, this was during that same meeting about the student, about being with the student one-on-one, or being with the student with Stephanie and I. This was the same meeting.
We were told we couldn't hold hands.
I was told.
Yeah, Christian was told. He could not give me even a side hug at church. My love language is physical touch. So if I'm having a bad day and the first time I see Christian is after I get off work and go to church, I'm going to want to hug, and he can't even hug me because it's a rule, apparently. So we were basically told that it doesn't matter what my love language is because it's inappropriate. And so we tried to express our concerns like, well, look, like, our end goal is marriage. It's not like we're just showing these students, like, whatever.
We're trying to show them a healthy relationship,
We're being serious. We're not just joking around. This is real for us. And they told Christian, their words were, well, it doesn't matter because there are married couples in the church that you wouldn't even know they were married.
And we want to keep it that way.
What?
That was the word.
And
there are married couples in the church that you would never know were married, and we want to keep it that way.
Christian came to me. Yeah, he came to me and he told me that, and I said, Christian, That doesn't make any sense, because where is your accountability? If Christian and I were married and some woman in the church walked up to Christian, thought he was attractive, but didn't know we were married because, that's how we want to keep it, and then starts to make a move on Christian, that's like a temptation, like that. There's no accountability in that. It's not safe. You're not protecting the leaders. It's just not smart. And so they were telling
So
him.
where does that come from?
I honestly couldn't tell you, because then I'm watching these students walk in, to the sanctuary, and they're holding hands and hugging. We had two students that you could see they were visibly dating, and they were. I will tell you, they were very good to have a healthy Christian relationship. I even still see them on social media sometimes, and they really do have a healthy, good relationship. They've been dating for several years now, and really do have a healthy relationship. But I honestly couldn't tell you where that was coming from. Only thing I could think was because even in conversations later with the lead pastor, is he came back to me, or he didn't come back to me. I could see that those rules were being put off on the youth pastor because they were things I was hearing come out of the pastor's mouth, passive aggressively to me.
Mind you, on a mission trip to Mexico, we saw the senior pastor and his wife kissing right in front of the students, which was fine. I don't care. But we were just told not to do that exact same thing.
And it wasn't like a kiss. Like, this was a good 2 or 3 second kiss. I mean, like, this was a good long, like, kiss. And they would, I mean, they would joke, and he would walk past her and tickle her and, like, mess with her.
Sure, there was some butt smacking.
I was gonna say, I couldn't remember, but I was gonna say I'm pretty sure I saw butt smack, but I wasn't even gonna say it because I couldn't remember. So the fact that you said it.
But you couldn't show any affection.
No,
couldn't even hold hands
because we were dating, and that's different than marriage. And that was another thing that was expressed, was because you're dating, it's not marriage, and that's not you can't. And again, granted, I understand that. But we had expressed to them and had been forward with them, look, me and Stephanie are dating. We want you to know me and Stephanie are dating just for the sake of the situation. I work here. She's volunteering. Just so you know, trying to respect your policies, your professional business policies, that this is what's going on. I'm dating a congregational member of the church. And they were fine with that. But again, then all of a sudden, if there was any sort of like affection shown, whether that was just I'm showing Joseph and Eddie this, but a side hug, or even just a friend, even just a hand touch or anything, we couldn't do that. We were told we could not do that because that is showing affection. But then I'm watching these students who are just friends hug each other. I'm like, okay, well then something just wasn't adding up. Something wasn't adding up. And so again.
So do you think it was, I'm just speculating. I mean, there's one of two reasons. One, it's a control issue, or B, it's they don't want their son who's in the youth group to see something. And it just makes me think. It seems a little complicated.
I think, well, and we found out some stuff later about their son. I think they knew that he was having issues.
There was some inappropriate Instagram profiles found on his profile that he was following.
Yeah. Not only that, but inappropriate pictures taken with females that we found.
Got it.
And so I think they were trying to encourage him not to do that. At the same time, it wasn't. We were encouraging that in the youth group, but then on a missions trip, those rules don't apply for married couples, and we can smack butts and kiss and all sorts of stuff, outside of that. And so it was just a lot of this back and forth. And again, a very long tangent, but it was just a lot of this back and forth of being told one thing and then seeing something else. And the mission, and this is where it got really crazy. They actually, so the way that this church was set up, you had your lead pastor, and then you had your executive pastor. And your lead pastor was your pastor that preached on Sunday mornings. And your executive pastor was the pastor essentially running everything behind the scenes. The executive pastor was the pastor that was that was the issue, that we were having the issues with, where he was giving direction to the youth pastor because they were buddy. And they ended up hiring another lead pastor later on, about 6 months after I had been hired. And great guy, fantastic. Messages were wonderful. Again, really a great hire for the church. They really needed a good pastor. The problem that we kept seeing is when they started to form a vision for the church, or a new vision for the church, the vision was love Jesus, love like Jesus. Love Jesus, period. Love like Jesus, period. That was their mission. And it was this idea that if we love Jesus, that it is very easy to love like Jesus. And we can show that we can show that love to anybody, across the area that we're located in. And so, which I was like, me and Stephanie were like, when he came in, we both were talking about it, had a long conversation about, we love that. That's a beautiful mission. Loving Jesus and loving like Jesus.
That sounds innocent enough,
Yeah, I mean, what a beautiful mission, showing people what the love of Jesus looks like, and so they can go, there's something different about them, and I want to know what it is. And we loved that. I mean, we ate that up. It was just this idea of just this simplistic loving Jesus and showing people what the love of Jesus looks like.
Well, and if you love Jesus, you don't have to try to love other people.
Mm-hmm. At
least not as hard as if you don't love Jesus. If you really truly have Jesus in your heart, that shows in your everyday actions.
Yeah.
You live your life a different way.
Yeah. If step one, if step two fails, refer back to step one. And that's kind of the way it was. And I think that was the beauty of it. I think that was the idea. It was this simplistic, very, again, pure idea of what does a good relationship with Jesus look like, and how can we show people in our community. And
it's funny when you said that, love Jesus and love like Jesus. I was like, okay, now there's nothing wrong with it. That's actually really good.
Yeah. It really was a beautiful mission, and we loved it. Again, part of the reason that we kept staying was because we were so confused by what we were seeing behind the scenes, and then what we were seeing on the front lines. And that's kind of where
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it was, especially when you're working on staff there. It was so different. And we were seeing two totally opposite. It's like you were seeing black and white, and we just kept trying to find the gray area, and there was none.
So describe that tension of what was preached from the pulpit, the vision statement, everything that looks good externally to someone who's like a first time or not. Because one thing that we noticed in our church, especially Eddie, and this is the thing that I shared with my pastor at the time, was like, from the outside, when you start going to the church that we were going to, I was just showered with love and encouragement. But the closer I got to the center, the core culture, the closer I got to leadership, the more that I got promoted, air quotes, that I saw that encouragement get replaced more and more with criticism to get me to conform more and more and more. So how would you describe, in your instance in this church, that tension or the disconnect between the core culture and the culture that they're trying to create for the congregation?
Yeah, and that's kind of where the question we were asking is, what does that mean for us? Where are we at, and how do we respond as worship leaders for our campus to that mission? Because we loved it. I mean, like I said, we ate it up. I mean, it was just like, this is a beautiful mission. And we kind of felt like things may be getting back to normal. Maybe things are going in a good direction now. We're good. But there was just, again, this dynamic that we kept seeing of, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that don't match up with that. And so when I say that, what it looked like a lot of times is there was, and I want to make sure I say this right, there was this beautiful mission, but what we kept seeing was it was being preached from the pulpit. We need to go out and show people what Jesus looks like, but then we were always worried about we were always more focused on what was going on the inside of the church, if that makes sense. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. It was almost like, let's go out and, well, okay, so maybe I'm kind of confused, but we always felt like, at least from our discussions while we were there, like our vision was love Jesus, love like Jesus, but we were only loving the people outside of the church the way Jesus would love them.
Yeah.
The people inside of the church didn't matter. But if you're not getting fed anywhere, then how are you going to go out and love somebody?
Exactly.
If I feel spiritually empty, I have nothing to give.
Yeah, and I could not remember the words that we used for that. That's exactly what it was. We were seeing this beautiful mission and we were wanting to give it to the community, but then we're completely forgetting everybody on the inside. And you could see that in the health of the church. We would have people come in. I mean, I don't know how many times I saw new visitors come in the church, and they'd be there for one service, two services, and they were gone and we never see them again. The people that we had at our secondary campus, the one that I was leading at, were the people that were coming consistently on a regular basis. We didn't have new members come in. We didn't have new people come in other than when they were added to the staff, myself. And so you didn't see that a lot. You didn't have these new members coming in because the problem was going on the inside of the church. And we were more focused about going out instead of it's the whole, what's the verse? How can you pull a speck from your friend's eye when you've got a log in your own? How can you help pull a speck out of your friend's eye when you've got a log in your own? We've got this giant log of all these things that are going on. We don't have any regulations as far as what relationships and what good, healthy marriages look like in our church. And we're expecting our members not to show affection to each other, but then the lead pastor can smack his wife's butt and they can make out in front of students, and that's okay because they're married and they're the lead pastors.
Well, and even then, we were told, I had some questions, and this kind of ties in later, but I had some questions regarding my role as Christian's significant other. We were not married at this point. Were we engaged? I think we were engaged at this point. We had been engaged, and I had some questions about what my role was because I was being told, no. I was having my hand smacked, but giving nothing to
fix the issue.
Like, there was no, don't do that, do this instead. I just was told, no, stop, and left at that. And so I had some questions, and they had told us no, like, male, female, one-on-one. Like, I couldn't go to a male leader and have a private meeting with a male leader. So when I asked these questions, they told me, well, you need to talk to this woman, or this woman. Well, one of those women and I didn't get along. Like, she just always made me feel like I was less than her, and so I just stayed away from her.
Mind you, this woman is the lead pastor's wife.
Yes.
Or not the lead pastor's wife, the executive pastor's wife.
So I just stayed away from her because it made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't, like, important. Like, I mean, I felt like my job to help Christian was important, and so she just made me feel less than her, and I didn't like that, so I just stayed away. And the other two women, I did not know at all. So I said, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to ask these questions. I'm just going to have to figure it out on my own. If the church can't help me, then I don't know where I'm going to get these answers, but I'm just going to figure it out on my own. And later in our time there, I had some more questions about something else that had happened with me and Christian, and they sat me down with the youth pastor, one-on-one, by ourselves, male and female, and corrected me and told me what I needed to do. After they had just told me I was not allowed to speak with a male, I had to talk with a woman.
And this was just, again, one of many. We're probably not even hitting the tip of the iceberg with this was just the small amount of psychological stuff that was going on that we were dealing with.
So did it make you feel crazy?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were nuts. And everybody else looked at us like we had three heads. I mean, even when we would go to like the main campus, because I was leading at the secondary campus, even when we would go to the main campus, it was like people would just look at us like, what are you doing here? And it was just awkward. It was awkward. It was weird. I could not even hold my fiance's hand. And I'm like, what? Why? I can't even express, this is my fiance. This is the person that I'm going to marry.
We feel like God has called us to be together, and we can't even express that.
Yeah, her expression, her love language is touch. My love language is words of affirmation. So truth be told, some of words of affirmation comes from me affirming the fact that she is my fiance and you can't have her. And so I can't even, she can't express her love language, nor can I express the fact that this is my fiance. And it was just, especially when you're being taught these are the love languages. And I remember we had a message specifically on what the love languages were and how they need to be expressed in a healthy and positive way. And again, being told this from the front lines and then going back and being told we can't even touch. And I'm like, am I nuts? Is
Yes.
what
So
is going on?
my story, my disconnect was being told that I haven't being told by the head guy that I haven't lost my temper in 30 years, and then getting 35 corrective messages with a very stern tone, and I'm like, okay, and then all I'm doing is questioning myself.
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong? Where did I come up short? Am I missing this? Am I crazy? What the heck is going on here?
So yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what happened is we started asking those questions, and I finally I took to social media and I did it in a not in a corrective way, but in a way that was asking a productive question of just saying, how would you handle this? And I actually had several groups that I was in that were closed Facebook groups that I'm still currently in, that are for people in ministry that are struggling with these kind of things, which might even be a great resource for your guys' podcast, because
wait, hold on. So this culture got so bad for you that you actually found a Facebook group as like a refuge outside source for people.
Oh yeah,
struggling in ministry.
Exactly.
So I want to nail down on this just a little bit before we move on to like the other churches and all that you've been a part of. It almost feels like this culture at this church, because you guys were there for a little bit, for a while. It just seems like it was one thing after another. It's not necessarily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one dramatic event where they were just like emasculating you and like traumatizing you, but it's almost like this overtime psychological abuse just piling up and piling up and piling up to where you just, you question yourself, you question your relationship, you question everything, and you're just going crazy because of the inconsistencies between what is preached from the pulpit and the expectations for you. That's very, you told me in a text when we were talking about this that a common thread in your story is an obsession with image. How did that obsession with image play out in this church specifically?
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. That was just, let's take a chisel and chisel a little bit here, and then chisel a little bit here, and chisel a little bit here. And it was the same thing that you guys were both explaining in your stories. We're going to chisel this person away to the point that they look and act exactly how we want them to act. You speak the language, you say what we want you to say, you do what we want you to do. You can be a part of our church. Great. We love you. Come on in.
Yeah, now that we've created who you are as a person, then now you're welcome here.
Yeah. Let's just take you. We're gonna form you from a giant block and make you look like the statue of David or whatever. So it was just this let's make you look the way we want you to look. It very much, when you were saying that in both of yours, I'm like, this is exactly what we dealt with.
And it took away your ability to love fully, not in sin, but just love because they were afraid of you sinning. It's not that you were sinning; they were afraid of you sinning.
And we couldn't have relationships with other people. Yeah, we couldn't have relationships with other people because we were so concerned with what was going on inside of ourselves that even the thought of having a relationship within a small group, within anything, was God-forsaken at that point. We stayed away from our young adults group because we didn't feel like we, in that moment, deserved to even be around them.
We felt crazy to the point that we started backing out of everything that you're supposed to go to. I mean, small groups, church services. I mean, if we didn't have to be there, we weren't there.
Yeah. We didn't want to be there.
When we first started dating, the church would do like movie nights and all this stuff. And I was like, Christian, let's go. And we would go. And then things just started getting so bad for us. We were like, I don't even want to see those people. It was just like, if we go, there's another opportunity for them to tell us how horrible
for them to
we
nitpick
are.
us. Yeah.
And we don't want to be around that.
What, either explicitly or just through feeling their judgment?
You felt like you were being, like there was a camera on you at all times. Oh, you felt like you were constantly being looked at. You couldn't even watch the movie.
I don't know what movie was
tell
that.
you what movie we watched
You were
that day.
afraid of how you were interacting in the movie, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was like if we didn't react the right way to what was going on, then oh, God forbid, And it was just this kind of culture that they were maintaining of, again, just being chiseled away to the point that there was almost nothing left. And you just got to this place. I remember when we were finally done, there was a conversation between me and Stephanie. I'm like, I remember bawling my eyes out saying, what did I do that was so wrong? I loved this job. The pastor that I was under was fantastic and was still encouraging throughout this whole thing. And I remember when I finally, I'll get to that in a minute, but to really shorten this down, because I know we're getting really long here. But I remember it got to a place where they had actually my lead. He had been moved to a different position. My direct report, my campus pastor, had been moved to a different position. We were still working very closely together, but he had been moved to a different position, and they brought a new campus pastor in. Mind you, this campus pastor had gone to school with the lead pastor that they had just brought in. So they were like recruiting from, like, they knew each other.
He
These
was
guys
younger
knew each other.
than you.
He was younger than me. The lead pastor, the campus pastor they brought in I was 23 at the time. He was 22. So it was kind of awkward as well there. He was not married, was not even in a relationship, did not have a Facebook even at that point in time. I mean, this has only been 3 or 4 years ago. Just was very, and again, I think some of it had been in the church that he was leading at that point in time. But 22, prior to being at the church he was at, was leading at another church as the lead pastor. So was very successful for what he was doing. But we had sat down to get to know each other, had a great conversation, seemed like a really nice guy when I first met him. And Stephanie has a way of reading people that I don't a lot of times, and I think that's where that's what kind of what the woman's job is in a marriage. Is their job is to read the things that you can't. Your job is to be the support so that they can be the lookout. And that was most definitely what happened. I remember she came to me after she got to meet him for the first time, and she said, I don't like him. I don't like him. There's something about him. He seems nice up front, but something about him just gives me a weird vibe, and I don't like it. And I said, well, and I'm the kind of person, I'm devil's advocate for everything. I'm like, well, just give him a chance. Maybe it was just the situation or whatever. And I've kind of backed off of that since we've been married. But as you do. And I just remember her saying that, and then I got sat down for a corrective meeting because we had a situation with one of our musicians where he had been combative. He was a couple years younger, grew up in a very awful home life, and he was very combative to the point that I would tell him to do things. He played drums, and so he had control of all of our tracks, and he would do things just to spite me, because he didn't like me. Like I would tell him, okay, start the tracks, and he would wait 3 or 4 seconds after I told him. Like we would have a countdown before service, and I would tell him, start the tracks on this number, and he would wait 2 or 3 seconds afterward and then start the tracks. So the tracks wouldn't start on time, and I'm waiting 2 or 3 seconds for my tracks to start and come in my ear, and nothing's starting. And I told him to do it, and he would do this every week. It wasn't like it was a consistent thing.
And then he'd make jokes about it. Mind you, we'd already had issues with this same person at the beginning of our relationship. Christian and I had dated for a couple weeks. I had gotten out of an abusive relationship.
Me and this person were friends, mind you, early on, and he would hang out with us for early on in me and Stephanie's relationship.
You're good. We'd all go out and hang out, and he would see us when we were dating for those first couple weeks, and then I kind of had prayed, and I was like, God, if you gave me Christian to take me out of where I was at, take him away, I won't be mad. And Christian called me later that day and told me we needed to just be friends. So we had stepped back from our relationship, and we had just become friends for a while. And while we were friends, I still wanted to date Christian, and he was still just kind of in a weird headspace. And this specific volunteer, Christian's friend, had kept coming to me and was like, you don't need to wait for him. You need to just move on. You don't need to let him treat you like this, which he wasn't even treating me poorly. He just was making me wait. And so...
And did you become friends because of the church culture and that pressure?
I think some of my headspace was because of that, truth be told. Yeah, I think the reason that we broke up in the first place was because I was in a weird headspace at that point in time. There was a lot of things that I was dealing with mentally at that point in time. that were affecting me, and I think that was some of it. Yeah.
Did you ever feel safe to communicate that to leadership or anything like that? Or
No,
yeah,
no,
I knew
no.
the answer. I
That
knew
was
the answer. I
yeah.
knew
No,
the
that
answer.
wasn't a question. Yeah, that
Yeah.
no. I will say I did go to my direct report, that the one that me and him had a good relationship. I went to him once about it. No, I take that back. It wasn't him. No, that was another personal friend. No, I never. No. So yeah, no, I never went to anybody. No.
It just boggles my mind that you're at a church that says to love Jesus and love like Jesus, but on the inside you don't feel comfortable enough to be yourself, that you have to go to Facebook groups and outside places to confide in. That's how it is in the staff culture of the church that we were from, that Eddie was telling me about. It's like you feel like you can't be yourself because you'll lose your influence or your leadership. So what was it? What was the turning point at this church where you're like, okay, I'm done here? Like, what was the, okay, I'm done. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
You know?
So
I've learned enough. I've learned enough in stories like this, Joseph, and all the podcasts I listen to. There's never one thing.
yeah.
It's finally a last thing.
Oh yeah, no,
Okay.
and Eddie, you hit that, you knocked that nail all the way through the floor. Yeah, that was what happened. It's that moment when you say, God, I'm just going to trust you with it. You're going to take care of it. If you open this door, you can close it, and you just kind of get to that place where you're like, and Stephanie told me, she said, you just need to get out of there. You just need to leave.
I'd been telling you that.
Oh
for-
yeah. Oh yeah. We were having issues with this volunteer. We were having all sorts of issues, just this, that, and the other. I couldn't tell you, but I finally had a conversation where I sat down with my direct report, my new direct
Well,
report.
prior to that, right before the wedding stuff.
Oh yeah. So we were getting married. My direct report that me and him had a good relationship is actually the same person that married us. And because we just had a wonderful relationship with him. Again,
Did our
still,
marriage counseling.
yeah, did our marriage counseling. He's wonderful. I mean, was just wonderful to us. Like I said, I can't say enough good words about him. But anyway, I had gone to the church. I said, hey, and this was again kind of where that turning point happened. I had gone to the church and said, hey, we're needing chairs for our wedding. Is there a possibility that we could use? I knew that the church had a set of wedding chairs. I said, is there any way that we could use like the outdoor wedding chairs that you guys have? We don't have chairs. We don't want to pay a god awful amount for chairs. You know, can we use the chairs? They said, oh yeah, absolutely. I'd gotten that from my direct report. He said, let me just make sure with a couple of people. Yeah, I'll let you know. So they had said we could do that. We could borrow some tables. We were set. I was like, well, at least at the end of the day, if they're going to bless us with this is great. A week before the wedding, I get a call from the executive pastor. And he tells me that, no, we can't use the chairs.
No, he didn't even call. We had to ask.
Oh yeah. He texted me. He texted me and said, no, we can't use the chairs, and no, you can't use the tables because those are not for events like that. You have to be a part, we don't let people use those for non-church events. And I was like, okay, well, this seems like a church event. Half of your congregation is coming to my wedding. I feel like that's a pretty good sized church event, and it's happening at a location that the church uses for their campus, because we were doing it at the church campus that we had that I was working at. And I'm like, well, I think that's pretty well like a church event. At one point we were getting ready to move all of our stuff in together. They had told us we couldn't use one of the church trucks. I didn't have a way to get a van at that point in time. I needed to move a couch that day. They told us we couldn't use the church truck because of the same reason. The church was not.
It's for ministry purposes.
It's for ministry purposes only. That's what it was. It was for ministry purposes only. And I'm like, is me moving out of my house not a ministry opportunity?
Yeah, this sounds like what you were talking about, where you're so obsessed with the outsiders that you neglect people, your staff.
Exactly, and that's what it was. Well, this
leaders.
isn't a ministry opportunity. This isn't an opportunity for us to go tell people about Jesus. So because it's not, no, you can't use it. Well, nobody's using the van that day. Sorry, you still can't use it. Okay, that's fine. I'll go rent a $200 truck and figure it out. And so it was just stuff like that. Again, little chiseling away. And finally, Stephanie, like I said, she had been telling me for a long time, you just need to get out of there. And right about the time we got ready to have our wedding, they had been preaching a message on our vision. And the question that the lead pastor had asked was, what does loving like Jesus really look like? And Stephanie took to social media And she asked that question. It was just a very productive question of what does loving like Jesus really look like? And not to jab at anybody or anything. It was just like, what does this look like? Because we were so confused at this point.
I wanted a public answer. I wanted people who were not involved in this church to tell me, was I crazy or was I not? Because I didn't feel like I was being loved like Jesus would love me. So what does it really look like? And so I just asked everybody else on my Facebook.
Yeah, and I finally, what was it? Not even the next, not even.
It was the same day.
It was the same day. It was an hour or two later. I got a phone call from my new direct report telling me that I need to tell Stephanie to take her social media post down.
And
Boom.
And they didn't talk to you.
No, they didn't talk to Stephanie.
We weren't even married yet.
We weren't even married at this point. We were getting ready to be married. They said, you need to take that down. And on top of that, I need to meet with you tomorrow at Starbucks down the street. He calls me on the phone, tells me to tell Stephanie to take her post down because he didn't even give me an answer. He just said, Stephanie needs to take her post down. Didn't go to Stephanie, didn't text Stephanie, nothing. Just said, she needs to take her post down. And didn't give me a reason, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. So Stephanie, and she can hear the conversation in the background. She said, I'm taking it down right now. She's saying this where he can't hear it. She's like, I'm taking it down right now, whatever. She was just mad. I mean, livid at this point. And I would have been too. I'm like, she was asking a productive question, just trying to get some understanding. And they don't even give us a reason why we need to take it down. She needs to take it down. And then they're telling me, on top of that, I need you to come sit down in a meeting with me and the lead pastor. And we need to talk about some stuff at Starbucks. And I'm like, okay, I know what this is.
What did they say? What did they say at the meeting?
So, well, I mean, at that point I knew if they're wanting to sit down and have a conversation with the lead pastor, I'm getting fired. I know it. I know that's what it was.
And I had said something when we were at church and they told us we couldn't have the chairs for the wedding. I had said, wow, that to the campus pastor, I said, wow, that's really loving, huh? But I mean, I was so done at that point.
Yeah, we were just livid at that point. I mean, what do you say? What do you do? You've just been abused and used and abused at that point. And so,
Stephanie, if it helps you, Stephanie, my wife checked out almost the last 5 years we were a part of that church. She only went just to see people, certain people, not everybody, just certain people. And during staff meetings and other things that we were involved with, she was uninvolved. She was disengaged.
I told Christian at our last month and a half there, I said, I will go in and I will be there for worship, and then I will go out to the car and I will watch a sermon online. I'm
not watching the sermon from the church. I'm watching another sermon from another church because she was just so mad. I mean, and granted, I had to be in the building, so I stayed in the building. I did my job. If that meant going and sitting in the hallway and sitting on my phone the whole time until I had to go back in and do our last song, that's what I did because we were just checked out at that point. Everything we were being told from the pulpit, though it was fantastic, was not the same thing we were seeing on the back lines. And so finally, I'll say this, I meant to mention this earlier, a couple of weeks before this whole thing had happened with the pastor wanting to sit down after Stephanie's post, he had pulled me in the room and he had wanted to have a vague conversation, again, at a coffee shop. Wanted to have a vague conversation with me about just about what was going on at the church. We had that whole issue with the volunteer being divisive, and so he just wanted to sit down and say, this is what's going on. And he sat me down talking about this volunteer, and I explained to him, we need to just do something about this volunteer. If that means asking him to just step away because he's being so divisive. He was being verbally abusive at one point. He was just very abusive. He punched a wall while we were at the church, in front of other members, in front of students, because he was so angry at me. He was just very abusive and he really needed some mental help. He was just dealing with a lot of stuff with his personal life and his home life. And so I was just really trying to be, to help him because I knew at that point I was still maybe his friend. And after the whole conversation, that volunteer had gone to my new direct report and talked with him. And that's when we had this conversation at the coffee shop. And he sat me down, essentially told me that I need to leave the whole thing alone. And said, sometimes when you work in ministry, you just have to learn to bend over and take it. And at that point, that was enough for me to say, okay, I'm done. You just suggested rape, whether it was whether it was emotional or not, or physical or whatever, you just suggested rape, I'm done. And at that point, that's when I checked out mentally, emotionally, physically. I was just there to lead worship. I couldn't even lead worship anymore. I was just there. I was just a vessel trying to allow God to use me as much as I could. I mean, I was walking in, I would go home and throughout my week try to fill myself up, and then I was just dumping my whatever was left in my cup onto the conversation, whether that was an ounce of spiritual liquid, whatever that was. I was done. I was barely getting filled to try and fill up the rest of my conversation during worship. I can't do that. I mean, and if you've ever been in, I say this to the people that are listening, if you've ever been in ministry and felt that, I can only imagine the amount of emotional and psychological pain you're going through, because that's what it was. It was just this, you're pouring yourself out. I mean, I remember after service, I'd just be exhausted. There were times I remember I could not even pack up. I'd have to tell Stephanie, I got to go sit out in the car. I got to relax for a minute because I cannot do this anymore.
And I would tear down the stage.
She would have to do everything because I literally mentally, and she was so wonderful during that time because I literally mentally and emotionally could not do it anymore. I was so exhausted.
And this was like after a service, like on a weekend?
This was after service because we had to break down. And after service, I just told her, I said, I mean, I literally was essentially saying to her, I have to check out. I can't right now. I literally can't anymore. I'm so exhausted. I'm just emotionally tired.
Sundays were hard for us. All we would do was argue.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I mean, and then once we left, it was so much better.
It was, we would literally have arguments from the stage quietly because we couldn't have these out loud. God forbid they saw any sort of weakness between our relationship.
That image thing.
But, yeah, exactly. We were having these arguments amongst each other. I mean, and oh goodness, the amount of the vulgar language that I was using at that point in time because I was so angry was excessive. I was mad. I mean, and I'm sitting up there putting these drums together, just jamming stuff together and saying every profanity I could possibly think because I was so angry. I was getting frustrated at her for stuff that she wasn't even doing wrong. She was doing what I asked her, but because she wasn't doing it exactly the way I wanted to, I was getting frustrated because I'm so emotionally drained.
Well, and mind you, I have no idea how to properly wrap a cable at this point. So, like, I'm like, okay. And everyone else who was there, like the church leaders, we're standing at the back drinking coffee, talking.
Yeah, and we're trying to set up this whole stage by ourselves. So they're just watching us do it, and they would do this every Sunday. Yeah.
Christian, let me tell you this. I used to lead missions trips, and sometimes there would be 60, 80 people on the trip, and I would be so exhausted, not because of leading the people on the trip, but making sure that everything went well so that I would not get in trouble. That was my major focus, was not getting in trouble. So sometimes I'd be short, unkind, under pressure, absolutely tore it, and still trying to look the part, just trying not to get in trouble because you had to please them. Oh man. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So I really love what you said, Christian. I don't love it. But I feel like it encapsulates spiritual abuse so well that sometimes in ministry, you just got to bend over and take it. That's so graphic, but that's a vivid picture of what happened. So there's two things I want you to dive into because we're getting a little close to time. Because you were mentioning to me about the significance of image, and that seems to be the suffocating power that got you to this point, that obsession with image, and not so much a positive image, but an image that you can't, that is impeccable so you aren't judged, so you don't get corrected. Can you talk about that briefly? And then second thing, you were talking about that thing about Christian virginity and all that stuff that I also want you to kind of talk about as well. So if you could dive into those two things.
As we give me your first question one more time.
The obsession with image and how that can suffocate you over time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that was the key to it all. It became a common saying around our home after we got married. It's not what it is, it's what it looks like. And that's why I said that earlier, because that was the common phrase. And it was a joke. It was a joke because we know that should never be the way that it is. It shouldn't have to be that way. Unfortunately, due to our culture, it is that way. It should never have to be. It's not what it is, it's what it looks like. But some people deal with things. Some people are. It's
doesn't
like when
God not look? Doesn't God not look at the outward appearance, but look at the heart?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
it's the same thing when you're driving down the road and you've got some stupid idiot driving in front of you or whatever, you know? You don't know what he's dealing with. They don't know what you're dealing with. And guess what? There's a certain amount of grace that you have to be willing to give because you don't know the situation, because it's not what it is, it's what it looks like, rather. We're so caught up in this idea that it is, and so you're feeding that idea into your church culture, and people that aren't at the church are seeing that, whether you want them to or not. They're seeing that. If they see that it's not what it is, it's what it looks like, why would I want to go to a church like that? Why would I want to put myself in a place where people are nitpicking everything I do from the second I step in their door? Not even that, from the second I park my car on the property. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not fair. It's psychologically demeaning and emotionally demeaning. It's just, I don't even have the words to express it. It was so psychologically
Suffocating.
yeah, psychologically suffocating that you just don't even know, you can't breathe. And I remember feeling that way when there was one of those moments when I felt like I couldn't even break down the sanctuary. Those were those moments. You're just so psychologically suffocated that you're like, I've just got to stop. I can't.
So how are you now?
Oh my gosh. I just remember the day that I walked into that Starbucks and they told me that they were letting me go.
Why
And
did they tell you they were letting you go?
I can't. What was the
Because
reason?
of my post.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I never said that. The
you
reason that
kidding
they
me?
were letting me go, it was the next day. It was the day after she posted that. They were letting me go because of her post.
But you
That
took
was
it
exactly
down.
the reason. Yeah. Oh no, but that's not enough. That's not enough. It affected their image. So and mind you, the post was, what does loving like Jesus really look like? How is that
That's
affecting your
literally what I
image?
said.
How is that affecting that? That's a valid question and a great question after a message that the pastor just preached about what loving like Jesus really looks like. Let's hear it from the culture outside the church. Let's see what they think. What a great and positive question to ask the community.
Well, and what a good ministry tool. When you give me your answers, then I can say, hey, how about you come to church with us next Sunday and you can hear what loving like Jesus looks like, you know? They had no idea what my intentions were and they fired Christian over it anyways.
But I mean, to answer your question,
Because
Eddie,
it's not what it is, it's what it looks like.
exactly. But to bring it back home, to answer your question, that I just remember the day. You know, you have those moments, and my mom has always said it this way, of that moment when you're like, you know, when a bad thing is coming to an end, but you don't want to let it go. It's that whole like you're just relieved, like you're in shock that it's coming to an end, even though I could see this coming from a mile away. You're shocked to see it come to an end, but it was just the relief of it was over. And I remember how wonderful, I really do. I remember how wonderful a day we had after I found out I got fired, essentially. We had a wonderful day after that, me and my wife, or me and my fiance at the time, me and Stephanie. I just remember it was just such a wonderful day after that, of just like, and we joked and laughed about it. It was just like, you know, you couldn't help but like joke and laugh about it. But
we
it was
would
like,
do stuff or say stuff, and we'd be like, oh, wait, we can say that now. We can do that now.
we could, yeah, it was just, yeah. It was just,
yeah, my wife and I do the same thing. They fired. How long before your wedding? You were getting married in a week, and they fired
before
you.
our wedding.
not, yeah, it was like less than that. No, it was like,
God.
And they were underpaying you. And they were underpaying you, wouldn't let you use the church property, so you had to rent that stuff on top of your low. It's just.
They fired Christian that Monday or Tuesday, and our wedding was Saturday, and we were leaving for our honeymoon on Sunday.
Nice.
the whole thing is just a lot of ins and outs and left and right turns. But truth be told, I think you've probably encapsulated the whole thing in just a few words. It was just, yeah, it was suffocating. And that moment of right after of walking out of that Starbucks, I remember walking out, and I was so glad they couldn't see my face because I was smiling from ear to ear when I walked out of that Starbucks because I was so happy. And it goes right back to, I just remember the thing that we constantly are looking for when we're looking for a church is just health. Just some place where we know that what we're hearing from the pulpit is what's being shown on the backside. And I know that, yeah, I'm just dragging it out now, but the huge breath that I was able to take after we left. It just felt like everything just floated off my shoulders. It was,
So, do you feel like that 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid at camp again right now?
oh my
Because
gosh,
I know you didn't that way when you were employed at the church, but do you right now?
the amount of times that I've seen God show up since we left has been awe-inspiring. It's been so amazing to see God show up in a way that I never thought he even could prior to all of that. I mean, and I'm sure that just comes, the wisdom comes with more and more age as you get older. But I mean, I just remember,
Not necessarily.
I just remember how I felt then, and the amount of times I've seen God show up since we left, and the amount of times I couldn't see God. I'm going to say couldn't see God because of where we were at, because it was so clouded. And that's what it was. It was just like this. I feel like Saul turning into Paul in that moment of just like, you feel like the scales are falling off of your eyes, and you're like, I can breathe again. I can see again. I can speak again. It was just, everything came back like I was like, you're a little kid. I mean, I wanted to skip and jump walking out of that Starbucks if they weren't sitting behind me watching me leave. It was just
I'm
like,
getting a tattoo here in the near future, and it's going to say one word, and it's going to be freedom, because that's how I feel now. I just feel free, and it's the most amazing thing.
it really is.
It's an amazing thing.
Wow. So one thing I want to say to our listeners, just as kind of like a commentary of what we've just listened to, is like, spiritual abuse is not always overt. Spiritual abuse is not always obvious. I think there were some more obvious instances in Eddie and my story, and Adam's story especially. There was a lot of overt stuff, but in Christian and Stephanie's story, we got to get a very up close look from the moment of Christian feeling called into ministry to where he is now, and how in between there was just this slow suffocation of life, to the point where he just didn't even have the energy to do a lot of stuff in the apex of what he felt he was called to do. So if you're in an environment where you feel like there's like this snake wrapping around you and slowly coiling you around and slowly squeezing the breath out of you, it's so tempting for us to gloss over that and say, well, I'm in the call of God, I'm just being attacked, or I'm being persecuted, and I need to just press on, or maybe it's my fault or whatever. So Christian and Stephanie, just as kind of like final thoughts, what would you say to somebody who's on staff right now, who is kind of on the fence of like, well, I don't know if I'm in a spiritually abusive environment. That's a harsh term right now. But it's a situation kind of similar to yours. What would be your words of encouragement to them, right in the middle of that?
I think it kind of, for me, I think it comes to one word, is listen. Not only to God, but to the people around you.
The people around you that care about you.
Not even, yeah, I mean that especially, but I think in those moments, I wish I had been listening more to the commentary that was going on around me, to the people that were talking behind my back, that were not kind, that were forcing my hand, that were chiseling away at me. I wish that I would have listened. I wish that I would have heard those little things. And so yeah, I think that really encapsulates, just listen. When God is speaking to you, he will speak to you in your prayer life, but he will speak to you through the people that love you and hate you as well. And you have to have an open ear, unfortunately, at all times, until you know the health of the situation.
Well, and something that, I mean, my grandma raised me, and something she's always told me has been, the people who know you the best tend to be, I don't even remember how she would put it. Basically, my grandma always told me, like, her opinions of my friends, and she almost, 9 times out of 10, she was always right. And if I hadn't listened to her, I probably would not be in the situations that I'm in now, because I would have been picking horrible friends. And something that just being a part of that church and then going through all of this, the big thing that comes to my mind is don't be afraid to just walk away. I've lost so many friends by just walking away from something because I felt like it wasn't the best thing for me, and sometimes I've been wrong. But I always told Christian, I said, Christian, we just need to leave. We just need to leave. We just need to leave. But that was his only source of income because the hours they were asking him to work, he couldn't work anywhere else. And so what he wasn't able to pay in his bills, I was paying for him. There were times when we first started dating, he would literally eat a burrito for dinner because that's all he could afford was a burrito because he had to make a car payment. And I was like, no, I live at home. We're going to go out and eat. We're going to get you something good. And I would just buy him dinner, and I didn't care. It wasn't a charity case. It wasn't oh, I feel bad for you. I was just helping him out because I cared about him. But I just kept telling him, Christian, if we just leave, everything will be okay. And you just have to trust that God is going to take care of you because since we've left, there's been nothing but, we've
Blessings.
just been, receiving so many blessings. Even through COVID, I lost my job for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. And now I'm on maternity leave, and we've just received blessing
We've
after
never
blessing.
we've never struggled for $1 since we've
It's been tight,
Yeah.
but we've always been able to pay our rent. We've always had a place to stay. We've always had food. We've always had heat and air, water. We've never struggled for the necessities. We may not be able to go buy what we want, but because we took that step and we were like, you know what, we're in such a toxic spiritual place, we've got to get out of here. We have to just trust that God will provide for us. And he did.
Yeah, that's good. And I love what you said about like not only listening to people around you, like outside voices, but listen to those inside voices objectively and say, is what they're saying congruent with their values, or is it something else? Are they showing me hate or love? Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the thing that drove you guys crazy was all that was preached from the pulpit was quote unquote love, but all that you experienced back in the background was judgment and just a no after a no after a no, to the point where they turned a blind eye when you were struggling financially and didn't help you in this quote unquote mega church. And it's just, the proof is in the pudding, people. And it's just like, you got to examine the fruit, and you got to examine, you can't just stand on somewhere based off of what they're saying from the pulpit. You've got to go much deeper than that, or else, it'll suffocate you. It'll drive you crazy.
And I want to answer your question from earlier because you asked, what do you, your question was along the lines of how do you, what do you look for in a church when you're looking for a church or something like that, wasn't it?
A healthy.
Yeah, what is a healthy church? The thing that I remember my friend saying now that I've had an opportunity to mull over all of this is he said, what kind of fruit are they bearing? And you kind of said that. What kind of fruit are they bearing? Are they bearing hate? Are they bearing anger? Are they bearing jealousy? Because those things are going to come out.
Control.
Yeah. Are they bearing love? Are they bearing joy? Are they bearing peace? Not to quote the Bible, but are they bearing patience, kindness, goodness? What are they bearing on a regular basis? That because you're going to see those things come out, and not only in the church life, but in your own life. And that was something that I remember him saying, and it was when we were talking about healthy church. It's always stuck with me is, what kind of fruit are they bearing? What kind of fruit are you bearing? And that's so important. Are you doing what's right for yourself, bearing in mind how it's going to affect others and affect your church and affect everybody else? It's your heart is just as important as every other heart in that church. And when somebody tells you that when somebody tells you that it's not, and they start trying to chisel away at your heart, that it's not their place. Only God knows your heart. Only God can make those changes. And you can't let people try to do God's job. That's what I'm trying to say. And the church and those spiritually abusive relationships, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do the job that only God can do in a way that is not productive whatsoever.
where were you 30 years ago? I could have used that. But I just want to thank both of you for coming on our podcast and being vulnerable. And I'm just letting you know that it's amazing the texts and emails I'm getting from people that I work with, that I grew up with, that I used to go to church with, that are listening to these podcasts. And it's it's healing people. When Hannah had the podcast with me and Joseph, and she shared that thought of where the senior pastor of the church we used to attend took over the role of parent. That's the first time I heard that, and it broke me. But that hour that we spent filming or recording that podcast, that was a healing moment for us. It was, and we're digging out of this, and we're probably as a healthy place as we've been as a family since we've been a family. And it's a process. It takes time. It takes time. So here's the good news for you guys. You've been through some stuff, and I apologize on behalf of leaders in the body of Christ for what you went through. But you didn't get in. You're young, and it hurts. It stings, but you've learned some valuable lesson that you will now be the leaders that the body of Christ and the church needs to help people in the future, that will listen, that will be kind, that will be there, that will hear the voice of God. And it's more important than a building or how it appears when someone walks in. It's people's lives, and whether that's someone walking in for the first time or someone who's on staff. I don't know what God's going to do with you guys in the future, but you've got things on the inside of you that's really going to help people. So thank you for taking time out of your afternoon with dogs and baby and everything else going on, and spending time with me and Joseph to help people. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank everybody for listening to the Spiritual Abuse Podcast. I hope that this made you think and gave you some red flags to look out for in your church if you are in a similar environment. As always, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, reach out to us at the spiritualabusepodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment anywhere that content is. Like we say all the time, we just want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. We want to hear how this podcast is affecting you. And who knows, maybe in the future, you could be a guest on this podcast to share your story. It really helps. Like Eddie said, brings healing to a lot of people. So thanks for listening, and have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.